The ballroom glittered with golden light, crystal chandeliers raining brilliance over polished marble floors. The air buzzed with the hum of conversation, laughter, and the constant clicking of cameras. Journalists leaned forward eagerly, pens ready, while investors clinked glasses of champagne, their faces glowing with satisfaction. Celebrities mingled in designer gowns and tailored suits, turning the celebration into something that looked more like an awards night than a corporate milestone. At the center of it all stood the man of the hour, the young millionaire whose company had just gone public, his name flashing across screens, ticker symbols rising like fireworks on Wall Street. He wore success like a second skin. His suit, perfectly cut, shimmered subtly under the lights, and the proud smile on his face told the world that he had achieved the impossible. Cameras followed his every movement as he shook hands with powerful executives, posed with influential guests, and accepted congratulations with a practiced charm. It was his night, the culmination of years of ruthless ambition, late nights, and sacrifices he preferred not to think about. The IPO had transformed him overnight into a figure not just of wealth but of power, and tonight's celebration was designed to cement that image in the minds of everyone who mattered. Music swelled through the hall, a live orchestra blending elegance with festivity. Waiters weaved expertly through the crowd, trays balanced with sparkling glasses and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Every detail screamed luxury, the towering ice sculpture at the entrance, the roses arranged in gold-trimmed vases, the exclusive guest list that left no seat empty. He raised his glass for a moment, allowing himself to savor the view, a room full of people celebrating him. For the first time, he felt untouchable, convinced his empire had no cracks. The doors at the far end of the ballroom opened with a soft but commanding sweep, and for a moment the music and chatter seemed to fade as heads turned instinctively toward the entrance. She stepped inside slowly, her presence drawing attention not because of extravagance but because of the quiet grace that radiated from her. A flowing winter coat framed her figure, but the gentle curve of her pregnancy was unmistakable beneath the fabric. Her hands rested protectively over her belly, as if reminding herself and the world that she was not alone, that she carried life within her. The lights from the chandeliers caught in her hair, giving her an almost ethereal glow. She was beautiful, but not in the polished, jeweled way of the celebrities already in the room. Her beauty was softer, honest, tinged with vulnerability that made her stand out more than any glittering gown could. A hush rippled through the crowd as whispers began. Who was she, this unfamiliar woman who had walked into the millionaire's most important night with such unshaken calm? She didn't smile, nor did she seek attention, but her very existence seemed to command it. Investors exchanged curious glances, journalists leaned forward as though sensing a story, and a few women narrowed their eyes, trying to place her among the city's social circles. Yet no one knew. To them, she was simply an unexpected guest who did not belong, and yet somehow fit perfectly into the grand, dramatic setting. She paused at the edge of the room, her eyes scanning, her breath steady, though her heart pounded beneath the surface. Every step she took seemed to stretch time, every gaze she met sharpening the sense that her arrival carried with it a secret powerful enough to shift the night's perfect balance. He was in the middle of shaking hands with a prominent investor, his smile broad, his charm effortless, when something in the air shifted. At first, he didn't notice it, just the way conversations faltered slightly, the subtle tilt of faces toward the entrance. Then, as he followed the pull of countless eyes, his gaze landed on her. In an instant, the glass of champagne in his hand felt heavy, the confident words perched on his tongue dissolved, and the perfectly rehearsed composure he had mastered for years began to fracture. There she was. The woman he had pushed out of his carefully curated world, the one piece of his past he had buried beneath ambition and deals, now standing in the very center of his triumph. Her coat framed her figure, but his eyes darted immediately to the curve of her stomach, unmistakable and undeniable. Pregnant. His chest tightened as though all the oxygen had been drained from the room. He blinked once, twice, hoping it was some cruel illusion conjured by exhaustion or stress, but when her gaze lifted and their eyes locked, reality slammed into him with brutal force. Shock gave way to disbelief. What is she doing here? How did she get in? Why now, of all nights? Questions spun in his head faster than he could control, but beneath them lurked something far more dangerous. Panic. The cameras were still rolling, journalists still watching, and investors still smiling, unaware of the storm now brewing inside him. His smile froze, brittle at the edges, his hand lingering too long in a handshake he forgot to release. For the first time in years, the man who thought himself untouchable felt exposed, as if one look from her could unravel everything he had built. Before the glittering ballrooms and flashing cameras, their world had been much smaller but infinitely warmer. They had met in a modest cafe, both young and brimming with dreams too big for the little corner they occupied. She had believed in him before anyone else did, when his ideas were scribbles on napkins, when rejection letters piled up, and when the future looked uncertain. Nights had been long, filled with whispered plans and shared laughter, their hands entwined across worn wooden tables as they promised each other forever. He used to look at her, as though she were the reason he could breathe. They built their love on simple joys, cooking together in their tiny apartment, saving coins in a jar for a trip they never took, and planning the family they were certain they would raise. She had believed his words when he told her she was his anchor, his inspiration, his home. But as his career began to bloom, the warmth of their little world was slowly replaced with cold ambition. Long hours turned into excuses, business trips into absences, and promises into silence. She tried to hold on, tried to remind him of the love they had once fought so hard for, but she could feel him slipping. When the chance for wealth and recognition finally opened before him, he chose it without hesitation, leaving her behind as though she had been a stepping stone instead of a partner. She remembered the day he walked away, the way he didn't meet her eyes, the way his voice sounded rehearsed when he said he needed to focus on his future. She had stood frozen, heartbreaking, while the man she loved chose ambition over love, trading their dreams for glittering promises of a richer, emptier tomorrow. Back in the dazzling present, she stood with a stillness that contrasted sharply with the buzz of the celebration around her. Her eyes, though shadowed with pain, carried a calm weight that spoke louder than tears or pleas ever could. She did not flinch under the curious stares of strangers or the cameras that occasionally swept past her, capturing her presence unknowingly. There was sadness etched into her features, yes, the kind that comes from wounds long ago inflicted, but it was threaded with something stronger, something unshakable. She had not come here to beg for answers or to cling to a love already broken. Her steps into the room had been deliberate, each one chosen with care. She knew what she risked by standing in this place where he was celebrated like a king. She knew the humiliation that could follow, the whispers that would ripple if the truth spilled out. But she also knew she could no longer remain silent, carrying his child in the shadows of his success, as though their story had never existed. Her hand remained steady on her belly, a quiet gesture of protection and promise. Every time her heart wavered, she reminded herself she wasn't alone, she carried the future with her. That truth anchored her, even as his stunned gaze lingered on her from across the room. Her silence spoke volumes. She wasn't here to cause a scene, nor to destroy him recklessly. She was here to stand in her truth, to remind him, and perhaps herself, that she was no ghost of his past. Her strength was not loud or vengeful. It was the kind that settled in her spine and lifted her chin. She wasn't a woman broken by abandonment, she was a woman who had come to confront it. At first, the crowd barely registered her as more than a striking stranger, but as the minutes passed, something shifted. The man of the hour, the millionaire everyone had come to celebrate, was no longer flawless in his composure. His laughter rang hollow, his handshake lingered too long, his eyes strayed again and again to the woman standing quietly near the edge of the room. The guests noticed. They always noticed. Whispers began like ripples across water. Two investors leaned close, murmuring behind raised glasses. "Who is she? He looks rattled. Have you ever seen him like that?" A socialite in glittering silver narrowed her eyes, whispering to her companion, "She doesn't belong here. Did you see the way he froze when he saw her?" The journalists, sharp as hawks, caught the subtle change in the air and scribbled notes, scenting a story that might be bigger than the IPO itself. The orchestra played on, but the undercurrent of curiosity grew stronger. Eyes followed the quiet woman with her protective stance and calm demeanor. Some thought she must be an ex-lover, others speculated she could be a forgotten relative, and a few with sharper intuition began to wonder if the swell beneath her coat was not just a trick of the light. Each theory fanned the fire of intrigue. Even the laughter of celebrities nearby carried a sharper edge, their smiles stretching thin as they exchanged knowing glances. They had seen scandals erupt before, and this had the makings of one. The buzz was no longer about the company's triumph, but about the mysterious woman whose mere presence seemed to unbalance a man who otherwise commanded every room he entered. Curiosity tightened around the party like a noose, waiting for the truth to fall. He could no longer pretend. The weight of her gaze, the whispers swelling around them, the gnawing panic in his chest, he had to face her. Setting down his untouched glass, he excused himself from a circle of investors with a smile too tight, a laugh too forced, and began to cross the room. Each step toward her felt like wading through quicksand, his polished confidence slipping with every second. Cameras flashed, but in his mind, the crowd blurred until there was only her. Still, calm, waiting. When he finally stood before her, the world seemed to shrink. "What are you doing here?" he asked under his breath, his voice low and edged with panic. His eyes darted around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile, though it carried no warmth. "I came to see you," she said softly. Then her hand shifted over her belly, and the gesture hit him like a blow. "Or rather, we came to see you." He stiffened, his throat dry. "This isn't the time or the place," he muttered, trying to sound firm but failing. Her eyes held his, unwavering. "Is there ever a time for betrayal? For abandonment?" The calm in her voice made it worse, because it was not born of weakness but of a quiet strength he could not shatter. He glanced around again, struggling to mask the panic growing behind his eyes. "You don't understand. I had to choose this life. Everything I built." "Everything you built," she interrupted, her voice sharper now though still controlled. "We built it. Together. I stood by you when no one believed in you. And when your dreams finally took root, you cut me out as if I were nothing. You left me with nothing. Except..." She looked down, her hand resting again on her stomach. "This child. Your child." His polished facade cracked visibly. For a moment, he looked less like the millionaire host of the evening and more like the man who once whispered promises in the dark. Words failed him, tangled between guilt and denial. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and glanced nervously at the crowd that was beginning to cast curious glances their way. "You can't be here," he said finally, his voice almost pleading. "Not tonight." But she only shook her head, sadness and determination mingling in her eyes. "No, it's you who can't escape tonight. Not from me. Not from the truth." The tension between them hung heavy, but before either could say more, a sharp, lilting laugh cut through the air like glass. The mistress appeared at his side with the effortless confidence of someone who believed she belonged in every glittering room. Draped in a gown that shimmered like liquid silver, her hair swept elegantly over one shoulder, she radiated the polished glamour of high society. Every detail about her presence was deliberate, from the diamond bracelet catching the light to the way she leaned into him as though staking her claim. "Darling," she purred, slipping her hand possessively onto his arm, her eyes sparkling with a mix of pride and victory. "Everyone's waiting for your toast." Her smile widened, but it wasn't directed at him. It was aimed squarely at the quiet woman standing only steps away. It was the kind of smile that sliced, meant to belittle, to remind. The wife's breath caught, but she didn't flinch. Her hand remained over her belly, her eyes locked firmly on the mistress as if silently daring her to ignore the truth growing within her. For a fleeting moment, the mistress's smile faltered, the glow in her eyes dimming under the weight of that unwavering gaze. The crowd around them began to notice the odd triangle forming. His unease, the pregnant woman's presence, the mistress's calculated display of ownership. Whispers spread faster now, speculation burning hotter with every second. Some guests leaned closer, eager for scandal, while others raised their brows in quiet judgment. The millionaire's throat tightened as he stood caught between two worlds, one built on ambition and appearances, the other on promises broken and now resurfacing with undeniable force. And in that fragile moment, the carefully constructed image he had spent years building began to tremble. It began with a single murmur that spread like wildfire. A few words, overheard by a reporter too close to the private confrontation, were enough to ignite the fuse. Cameras shifted, microphones tilted, and soon the glittering IPO celebration was no longer about stocks or success, it was about scandal. The millionaire's carefully constructed smile faltered as flashes went off in quick succession, catching his paling face, the pregnant woman standing tall with her hand over her belly, and the mistress clutching his arm like a trophy. A hushed gasp rippled through the crowd when someone boldly whispered, "Is that his wife?" Another followed, "She's pregnant." And just like that, speculation became a storm. The mistress attempted to laugh it off, but her eyes betrayed her panic. The wife, however, did not need to speak loudly. Her quiet, piercing words carried in the silence that followed. "You built an empire," she said, her voice steady, "but you abandoned your family." The line hit the air like a whip, captured by every microphone, every phone camera recording the moment. Journalists exchanged gleeful looks, already drafting their scandalous headlines. Investors frowned, realizing the golden image they had bought into was crumbling under the spotlight. Celebrities who had flocked to be part of his night of triumph now shifted uncomfortably, stepping back as if to distance themselves from the flames of his unraveling reputation. And there he stood, frozen, stripped of the invincible aura he had carried for years. The cameras did not capture a victorious millionaire that night, they captured a man cornered by the very truth he had tried to bury. His empire's celebration had transformed into a public unmasking, one that the world would not forget. The music from the IPO celebration still echoed faintly behind her as she walked through the grand doors, but the pregnant wife didn't look back. Her heels clicked softly against the marble, her hand resting protectively on her belly, her head held high. The same crowd that had once whispered in pity now parted for her in silence, their eyes following the figure of a woman who had been humiliated, yet walked away with more dignity than the man who had built an empire. Inside the glittering hall, the millionaire stood frozen, staring after her, his mind a whirlwind. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. The empire he had boasted about now felt fragile, as if the foundations were already cracking under the weight of truth and scandal. His mistress tugged at his arm, but he didn't respond. His eyes were still fixed on the space where his wife had stood only moments before. She, on the other hand, felt a shift within herself. Though her heart was still raw with pain, she realized she no longer carried the weight of his betrayal alone. She had faced him in the brightest spotlight and had not faltered. In that moment, strength replaced despair. Each step away from the glittering chaos was a step toward her own rebirth, her own story. The night air was cool against her tear-streaked face, but she breathed deeply, steadier now. Whether her path would lead to forgiveness, rebuilding her life in silence, or seeking revenge that would one day topple his fragile empire, she hadn't decided. But one thing was certain, she would never again be the woman he abandoned. She was stronger, sharper, and ready for whatever came next.